All right, this is question number 11 on homework 3. Dahlia Incorporation wishes to maintain a growth rate of 10% per year and a debt-equity ratio of 0.5. So this means the debt level is just 1/2 of the equity. The profit margin is 4.8%, and the ratio of total assets to sales is constant at 1.65. What dividend payout ratio is necessary to achieve this growth rate under these constraints? The rounding requirements do not round intermediate calculations. I always encourage you to read these rounding requirements because sometimes if you don't follow them, even if your steps are correct, you may not get the correct answer. A negative answer should be indicated by a minus sign. Enter your answer as a percent rounded to the nearest whole dollar. So the key to solve this problem is to link all the information together. So we're provided a bunch of information. And the question is asking what is the maximum, or what is the dividend payout ratio that's it has to be, which can achieve this growth rate. So the growth rate here is 10% under these constraints. So immediately we can think about the sustainable growth rate. So we can pull out our lecture slides and find the formula from the lessons in our SciCal website in session 3 under the required regions, and download it and open it once you download. So then bronze go down. We have this sustainable growth rate here. That's ROE times B. B here is the profit. ROE is the return on equity, right? B here is the profit retention ratio. So that is actually 1 minus the dividend payout ratio. And because the question here is asking us what is the dividend payout ratio, but once we can figure out the profit retention ratio, we can also easily figure out the dividend payout ratio. And ROE times B divided by 1 minus ROE times B. So that's the formula. And we know this growth rate, that's 10%. And the question is asking us what is the B here that's necessary to maintain that growth rate. And the rest of the variable, which is unknown so far, is this ROE. But based on the information given, we can estimate, we can calculate that variable ROE. So we are provided with the debt equity ratio, the profit margin, and the ratio of total assets to sales. These three variables, if we are familiar with the DuPont identity, which we learned in session 2, we can link these three pieces of information to ROE. Because if you pull out my lecture slides from session 2, the DuPont identity, ROE, can be broken up into the product of three ratios. So it's net income divided by sales, that's basically the profit margin, and sales divided by total assets, that's from session 2 we know that's basically the total asset turnover ratio. And then the final ratio is the total assets divided by total equity. That's the equity, that's called the equity multiplier. Even though we don't know each of these values, but based on the information provided, we can we can calculate each of these variables. So profit margin is directly provided. That's no brainer here. What about sales divided by total assets? If we read the setup, it says the ratio of total assets to sales is this 1.65. So that means the sales to total assets is just the inverse of this. It's 1 divided by 1.65. So we also can figure out the second ratio very easily. So the final ratio is total assets divided by total equity. So this requires some work, but not too much. Let me pull out my OneNote so I can write down. What we need is total assets. Sorry for my handwriting because I don't have the pen. I'm just using the mouse to write on the pad. So total assets divided by total equity, that's the definition of the equity multiplier. But based on the balance sheet identity, we know that total assets actually is equal to the sum of total liabilities and total equity. And then divided by total equity. So now I can further express this, just separate the two items on the numerator. So this becomes total liabilities over total equity plus total equity over total equity, that's 1. So now you see why I want to break up the total assets divided by total equity this way, because we are provided with the debt equity ratio. So this basically total liabilities to total equity, that's the debt equity ratio, right? So now I can just directly plug in this number, 0.5 plus 1, and this gives me 1.5. Okay, so that's also relatively easily done. So 1.5 equity multiplier. So now we can use this Dupont identity to figure out ROE. So ROE is basically the profit margin. Profit margin is 4.8%, 4.8% times the total asset turnover, which is sales divided by total assets, but we are given the total assets divided by sales, but we can just take the inverse of that number, 1 over 1.65. And then finally, the number we just calculated, the equity multiplier, which is 1.5. 1.5. Okay, so that's ROE. So obviously we're not done yet. We need the ROE because the formula here for the sustainable growth rate requires the ROE. But we eventually, where's the formula? Right here. Eventually, we are interested in this dividend payout ratio. Here, we are interested in the profit retention ratio. Once we can figure out profit retention ratio, we can just figure out the dividend payout ratio. So in the written solution, I provided a step-by-step guidance on how to solve this, basically solve this equation, right? Basically, the equation is the growth rate the growth rate, 10%, equals ROE. ROE, you can just copy that number. Oh, this is kind of anyway. It's kind of messy, but you see, you got the point. Times this unknown b and over 1 minus this 0.0433. Again, sorry for my handwriting because it's not easy with a mouse. Times b. Okay. So this is basically a one unknown equation, and we can solve out this equation by following the steps which I outlined in the written solution. But here I want to use a different way by using Excel actually to solve out this number b. So I can assume a b any number. So let's say 0.5. Okay, it's a magic number. Obviously, this may not be the correct number, but I want you to look at the steps. So the growth rate here is 10%. Oh, by the way, in order to use this Excel function, I have to actually slightly change this equation to be this whole chunk minus 10%. That equals 0. It's the same, right? I just moved basically 10% to the other side, so I need to change the sign. So this equation will become this in this format. So now I want to write this to be equals ROE times this b over 1 minus ROE times b. So that's the first item here, minus 10%. Okay, so obviously you see this is not very beautiful because I just randomly choose a b. So this is a ideally this is 0, right? I want this number to be 0 to make this equation balanced, but this is not. But I can use a magic function in Excel to make sure that a value of b ensures this value to be 0. How can I do that? I use I believe on the data and what if analysis. It's the goal sake, under the goal sake, and I want to set this A3 to be value 0 by changing cell B and then OK. Okay, so now you see B has to be, even though this is not strictly the 0 either, you see, but it's very close to 0. So, and it's actually, if you want, you can keep very large number of decimal places, so you can see it's very, very close to 0. I believe you can also manipulate the decimal places for this cell in order to get a more precise number, but I will skip that step here. But you see that magic B is actually this 2.08446, which makes this this whole chunk to be 0. That's the That's the value we want to get. So now I have to solve out B, the profit retention ratio. Again, what we need is not B, is D, the dividend payout ratio, but D is 1 minus that B. Right? So that can be done very easily. Equal 1 minus that B. So D is actually, again, a negative number should be indicated by a minus sign. So here we indeed has a negative number. Enter your answer as a percent, round it to the nearest whole number. So I want to change this format into percentage, and keep 0 decimal places as required. So it turns out this to be negative 108. So is this possible? This means that negative payout ratio. This is not possible, right? Because the firm can choose not to pay out any net income in the form of dividend. In that case, dividend payout ratio is 0, but negative is simply not possible. So this is not, that also means the growth rate here is not possible. So the next step, let me check my work to see, yes, see, this also get. So the next question is asking you, what is the maximum sustainable growth rate possible given these constraints? I believe you can figure out that answer straightforwardly by using that formula, because we know ROE and we know the maximum B is 1, right? Because in that case, the profit retention ratio is 100%, which means that the firm doesn't pay out any dividend at all. So that's 1. So you can easily figure out the last part, which I will choose to skip.